Rick Grimes spent the first 2 seasons of The Walking Dead trying to answer one question. It seems simple. It gets harder the longer you sit with it. What makes us different from them? The walkers kill. They move through the world without conscience or memory or remorse, consuming everything in their path. And so, in different ways and for different reasons, do most of the human threats the group encounters. The governor kills, Negan kills, the Claimers kill, Gareth and the Terminus cannibals kill, the Whisperers kill. On and on, group after group, season after season, all of them doing the same thing the walkers do, removing what is in their way. Rick's answer at the beginning was the rule: we don't kill the living. That's the difference. That's the line. Cross to one side of it and you're still human. Cross to the other and you've become something the old world would not have recognised. But here is the question. This video is going to spend the next hour sitting with: what happens to a rule when the world makes it impossible to keep? What happens to the line when every choice you face puts you on the wrong side of it? What does it mean that no one, not Rick, not Hershel, not Carol, not Daryl, not a single character across 11 seasons, managed to stay clean? Get comfortable. Let's find out. Chapter 1. Where the rule came from and why it mattered. Let's start at the beginning. Not the beginning of the apocalypse, not the beginning of the series, but the beginning of the rule itself. The moment when someone looked at the world they were living in and decided that the most important thing they could do, the thing that would determine whether they remained human or became something else, was to hold a single line. We don't kill the living. Rick Grimes says it first, and he says it with the conviction of a man who has spent his adult life in law enforcement. Someone for whom the sanctity of human life was not a philosophical position, but a professional identity, a thing he wore every morning, along with the badge and the gun. He was a King County, Georgia Sheriff's deputy. He had been trained in the specific, structured framework of the state's authority to protect people, to arrest people, to use force when necessary, and within defined boundaries. He had operated inside those boundaries for his entire career. The rule wasn't something he invented in the apocalypse. It was something the apocalypse made him need to say out loud for the first time. Because for the first time, there was no institutional framework enforcing it. There was only him and his word, and the people listening. It matters enormously that the rule is stated at the beginning rather than implied. The show knows exactly what it is doing by having Rick articulate it clearly, by making it explicit and conscious and deliberate. Because the entire narrative machinery of The Walking Dead is built around a single question: how long can this rule hold? And the answer, which the show delivers slowly, season by season, character by character, is never. It cannot hold. Not forever. Not for anyone. The world this story takes place in makes holding it impossible, and the tragedy is not that people break the rule, but that they try so hard and for so long before they do. Think about what the rule actually protects. It's not just the lives of the people who might otherwise be killed. It's something more internal, more essential than that. The rule protects the person who keeps it. It is the moral membrane between survival and something darker, the thing that allows Rick to look in the mirror in the morning and still see a sheriff's deputy, rather than whatever the governor sees when he looks in his. As long as you are not killing the living, you are still, by the show's moral taxonomy, one of the good people. You might be scared. You might be desperate. You might be capable of terrible things. But you are not there yet. You have not crossed over. It also gives you something to lose. And this is important in a world that has already taken almost everything. When you have the rule, you have a version of yourself that you are protecting. Not just your body, not just your group, but the particular person you believe yourself to be. Rick Grimes believes himself to be a lawman, Hershel Green believes himself to be a healer. Glenn Rhee believes himself to be someone who does not abandon people. These identities are real, and they are held in place, partly by the rule. The moment the rule goes, those identities become much harder to sustain. You are forced to reckon with the gap between who you thought you were and what you just did. And that reckoning, drawn out across seasons, returned to again and again with the patient stubbornness of a show that knows it is making an argument, is the emotional centre of The Walking Dead. This is why the first killing, every character's first killing of another living person, is treated with such weight by the show. It is not presented as a tactical decision or a survival necessity. It is presented as a threshold event, something that changes the person who crosses it in ways that cannot be undone. You can come back from a lot of things in The Walking Dead's universe. Characters survive losses that should destroy them. They find communities and rebuild and love again, and discover reserves of resilience that the audience finds genuinely moving. But none of them come back from killing the living for the first time. That particular line, once crossed, only moves in one direction. The rule also functions as a social contract within groups. When Rick states it, he is not just making a personal moral commitment. He is proposing an agreement for the people around him, a shared understanding of what kind of group they are and what they will and won't do to survive. And this social function of the rule turns out to be as important as its moral function, because the moment someone in the group breaks it, the agreement itself cracks. Everyone has to decide whether the agreement still applies, whether the person who broke it is still part of the group, whether they themselves are still bound by a rule that someone else has just demonstrated is breakable. This is exactly what the show dramatizes across 11 seasons. A rule is stated. The rule is broken. The breaking of the rule forces everyone around the rule breaker to recalibrate, and then eventually they break it themselves. And the people around them recalibrate again. The arc of the series is the slow, inevitable dismantling of the social contract that Rick tried to build in those early weeks, and the question the finale asks, quietly through Daryl and Judith and the world that survives, is whether a new contract is possible, whether a rule can be rebuilt, whether the line can be redrawn. Chapter 2. The meaning of the line. What separates survivors from monsters? Before we go through the characters, it is worth sitting for a moment with what the rule actually implies. Because we don't kill. The living is not just a behavioural guideline. It is a philosophical position. It is a claim about what makes human beings worth protecting in the first place. The walkers in The Walking Dead kill living things. That is their nature, the single defining characteristic of the undead, the thing that makes them the threat they are. They do not choose to kill. They do not weigh the decision. They do not feel guilt afterward, or justify it to themselves, or lie awake at night thinking about it. They simply consume whatever is in front of them, without memory and without consequence, because that is what they are now. The choice, the weight, the aftermath, all of that belongs to the living. It is the thing that makes the living still worth something. When Rick articulates the rule, he is drawing a line between the living and the dead that is not just biological. You are alive not merely because your heart beats and your lungs fill with air. You are alive in the way that matters. Alive in the way the show cares about. Because you are still capable of choosing not to kill. You still have that in you. The capacity to say no. The capacity to weigh another person's life against your own need or fear or desire and choose to let them live. The moment you kill a living person, something about that capacity shifts. It doesn't necessarily disappear. The show is careful and honest about this because it would be easy and dishonest to simply say that once you kill someone, you're a monster forever and nothing can change that. Characters in this story kill living people and remain, in important ways, good. Rick kills and remains good, or at least tries to. Carol kills and remains something like good, though the cost is written all over her. What changes is not their goodness, but their relationship to the line. The line is no longer in front of them. It is behind them, and everything they do from that point on is done from the other side of it. The show asks, persistently and without comfortable resolution, whether there is a meaningful moral difference between killing when you have to and killing when you choose to. Between killing someone who would have killed you and killing someone who might have been a threat someday. Between killing one person to save 10 and killing 10 people to save one. These are not rhetorical questions for The Walking Dead. They are the actual decisions the characters face in real time, with real consequences, and the show refuses to grade them cleanly. It refuses to say this killing was justified and that one was murder. It just watches and asks you to watch with it, and lets the weight of the accumulation make whatever argument it is making. The rule, we don't kill the living, is beautiful in its simplicity and impossible in its application. It is the kind of rule that only works in a world that no longer exists. In the old world, the state handled the killing. Police, soldiers, executioners, institutional actors with protocols and oversight and consequences. Individual citizens were not supposed to kill, and most of them never had to. The rule Rick articulates was built for that world. In the new world, it is a candle in a hurricane. But he holds it up anyway, because the alternative, the world without the candle, is the governor's fish tanks, and Negan's bat, and Alpha's pikes, and all the rest of it. And Rick Grimes, at least in the beginning, believes there has to be something else. Chapter 3, The Architecture of the Breaking, How the Show Builds to It. The Walking Dead has a very specific way of handling the first killing. It does not happen quickly, and it does not happen cheaply. The show understands that this moment is its most important dramatic tool, and it uses that tool with precision. The structure, across almost every character arc that involves a first killing of the living, is the same. There is first a period of exposure. The character encounters the reality of the new world, understands what it requires, but has not yet been forced to act. Then there is escalating pressure. Circumstances that make the eventual killing feel inevitable in retrospect, even if it didn't feel that way in the moment. Then there is the act itself, usually shown in close detail, with the camera staying on the face of the person doing the killing rather than looking away. And then there is the aftermath, the silence, the adjustment, the recalibration of who this person is now. This structure matters because it means the show is never treating the first killing as action. It's not a set piece or a cool moment or a sign of how capable the character has become. It is a psychological event, a before and an after. The camera wants you to see both, and it wants you to sit in the space between them. There is also an important distinction the show draws between different kinds of first killings. Some characters kill in immediate self-defense, when the alternative was their own death in the next few seconds. Some kill preemptively, eliminating a threat before it fully materializes. Some kill someone they love, which is its own entire category of horror. Some kill strangers. Some kill members of their own group. Some kill children. The show arranges these along a spectrum of moral weight, and where a character's first killing falls on that spectrum tells you almost everything about the trajectory of their arc. It is worth noting that the show also distinguishes very carefully between characters who kill the living and feel the weight of it, and characters who kill the living and don't. The ones who don't feel it, who move through killing with the same blank efficiency the walkers bring to it, are consistently coded as the show's villains. The governor does not flinch. Negan performs effect, but underneath it is something colder. Alpha doesn't distinguish between ending a living person and ending a threat. The characters the show wants you to root for, Rick, Daryl, Michonne, Carol in her complicated way. All carry what they have done. The weight is the thing. The weight is what separates them. With all of that established, let's begin. Chapter 4. Shane Walsh, the one who showed it was possible. Shane Walsh breaks the rule first, and he breaks it in the most consequential way imaginable because he doesn't just break it. He demonstrates to everyone watching, including the audience, that it can be broken and survived, that you can kill a living person and still walk back into camp and eat dinner and sleep and wake up the next morning. That the act does not announce itself on your face, that other people cannot necessarily tell. Shane Walsh is the proof of concept, and everything that follows in this story follows from him. His first killing of the living is Otis, in the second season episode Save the Last One. We have covered this scene in other videos, but it is worth going through it slowly here because the mechanics of it are important. Shane and Otis are trapped in a walker-infested high school, both injured, their ammunition nearly exhausted, carrying medical supplies that Carl Grimes will die without. They are outrunning a horde, and they are losing the race. Shane does the calculation. The mathematics of the situation resolve themselves with horrible clarity. One person cannot outrun the walkers, but one person running and one person not running, one person becoming the distraction, the slow bleeding obstacle between the horde and the man who carries the medicine. That might work. What is crucial about this moment, and what separates it from most of the killings the show later depicts, is that Shane's decision is not made in heat. He is not panicked. He is not acting on instinct or in the blur of a fight. He makes a choice, clearly and consciously, and then he carries it out. He says he's sorry. He shoots Otis in the leg. He strips the bag from the screaming man's back while walkers descend. He runs. At Otis's funeral, Shane constructs a false account of what happened. He makes Otis into a hero, the man who sacrificed himself so Shane could get away. He tells the story with a straight face, with apparent grief, and everyone believes him. Only later, when we see the raw patch on his scalp where Otis tore out a fistful of hair during the struggle, when Shane shaves his head to hide the evidence, do we understand the full dimensions of what he has done? He killed Otis. He lied about it, and he has already begun the process of making the killing acceptable to himself. This is the machinery of moral collapse the show is most interested in, not the killing itself, but the story Shane tells himself afterward. He is not a monster. He saved a child. The calculation was correct. Otis would have died anyway. One death against one life. The math works. Every step of this internal reasoning is understandable. Every step of it is also how someone becomes capable of doing it again more easily the next time, because the justification is already built and waiting to be reused. Shane goes on to break the rule again with increasing ease. He attempts to kill Rick, his best friend, the man he grew up with. Because Rick's existence is an obstacle to what Shane wants. This is a different category of killing entirely. Not survival, not mathematics, not the cold arithmetic of the horde at the door. Just desire and the willingness to remove what is in its way. Shane has travelled, in one season, from killing to save a child, to planning to kill his best friend because he wants his wife. The distance covered in that journey is the distance the show is charting. This is what it looks like. This is how fast it goes. Chapter 5. Rick Grimes, the rule maker who became the rule breaker. No arc in The Walking Dead is more important to understand than Rick Grimes' relationship with his own rule. Because Rick does not simply break the rule once and move on. He breaks it and then rebuilds the rule in a new form. He breaks the new form and rebuilds it again. Over 9 seasons, Rick Grimes is in constant negotiation with the line he drew at the beginning, constantly redrawing it to accommodate what he has already done, constantly insisting that the new line is the real line, the one that matters, the one he will not cross. He kills Shane first. This is the killing the show treats as the central event of Rick's moral arc, because Shane is not a stranger, or an enemy, or a threat from outside. Shane is the person Rick grew up with, the person who kept his family alive when Rick was in a coma and the world was ending. The person who loved Laurie and Carl in a way that was real, whatever else was wrong about it. Killing Shane is not a tactical decision. It is a personal decision, made in a moonlit field with full knowledge of what it is. Rick knows the trap. He walks into it anyway. He gets close and he puts a knife in Shane's chest and he watches his best friend die, and then he watches Carl shoot the reanimating body before it can stand. The speech Rick gives immediately after, "This isn't a democracy anymore," is the most important piece of dialogue in the first 2 seasons of the show. Not because it is surprising, but because it is honest. Rick is not pretending that killing Shane was an act of self-defense in the traditional sense. He's not constructing an elaborate justification the way Shane constructed one for Otis. He is saying, plainly, that he is the person who makes these decisions now, that the framework of mutual consent and collective governance that he had proposed is over, and that if you disagree, you should leave. It is the sound of a man acknowledging, out loud and in public, that he is no longer bound by the rule he started with. What follows across the middle seasons is a study in incremental escalation. Rick drives a machete into a prisoner's skull at the prison, calmly and without ceremony. He executes a man named Andrew because Andrew was a threat. He allows the death of people who might have been saved. He plans a preemptive assault on the Saviour's satellite outpost. People who are sleeping, who have not attacked anyone, who represent a future threat rather than a present one. And he leads it personally, moving through the building in the dark, cutting throats. These are not moments of self-defense. They are strategic killings, planned and executed with the same efficiency the governor brought to his own strategic killings, and the show is very deliberate about drawing that parallel. The throat bite scene in the season 4 finale is the show's most visceral statement about where Rick has arrived. A man is threatening Carl. Rick headbutts the man holding him, breaks free, and bites into the man's neck with his teeth, tearing out the artery, letting the man bleed into the dirt. Then he takes a knife and stabs Carl's attacker over and over, far beyond what is necessary, until Michonne has to pull him back. When Daryl finds him afterward, blood on his face and his hands, and asks what happened, Rick says, "I'm okay." But the look on his face is not okay. It is the look of a man who has just discovered something about himself that he cannot undiscover. The arc resolves, partially imperfectly, at the end of season 8, when Rick spares Negan's life. He slashes Negan's throat with a piece of glass and then immediately screams for doctors, choosing mercy over the killing that every person around him expected and many of them needed. My mercy prevails over my wrath. Carl's words, Carl's dying wish, Rick's improbable act of faith in a different version of the future. It is the only moment in 9 seasons where Rick chooses not to kill when he had already started. And the show treats it as miraculous, not because sparing a life should be extraordinary, but because for this person, in this world, at this point in his arc, it is. Chapter 6, The Governor. The rule was already broken when we met him. Philip Blake is a special case in this analysis because The Walking Dead introduces him to us after the rule is already broken, so thoroughly, so repeatedly, so comprehensively broken that the concept of the rule barely applies to him anymore. He has not crossed a line. He's built a settlement on top of where the line used to be, and planted vegetables over it, and is hosting block parties. But this makes him more interesting to examine in this context, not less. Because the governor's relationship with the rule, its complete and utter absence in his decision-making, illuminates by contrast what the rule was actually protecting in everyone else. Looking at the governor clearly is like looking at the end point of every arc the show is tracing in Rick and Shane and Carol and all the others. He is where you end up when there is no rule. When the rule was abandoned long ago, when the very memory of having once held such a rule has been not just erased but replaced with something else entirely. Philip Blake killed people before we meet him in Season 3. He killed a National Guard platoon led by Lieutenant Wells, ambushed them, took their weapons and vehicles and medical supplies, and left none of them alive. This was not a defensive action, it was a predatory one. The Guard represented resources and a potential threat to his authority, and so he eliminated them. He's been doing variations of this calculation for however long Woodbury has existed, and the fish tanks full of preserved heads in his private apartment are his accounting system, the record of every person whose death secured his position. What is most telling about the governor's psychology is not the violence, but the insulation from it. He does not appear to carry what he has done. He moves through his days with the confidence of a man who has resolved, at a deep level, that the old rules were a lie, that the world was always this brutal, and what the apocalypse did was simply remove the decorative cover from the machinery. This is his philosophical position, and it is not entirely incoherent. The world was always brutal. People have always died for the comfort and security of other people. The apocalypse is just more honest about it. The problem with this position, and the problem the show dramatises through the governor's eventual complete collapse, is that the insulation is not real. Philip Blake still loved his daughter. He still grieved her, obsessively and destructively, in ways that made the fish tanks look like a symptom of something much more human. His total abandonment of the rule did not protect him from loss or from pain or from the specific madness of a man who cannot let go of the thing he has lost. He carried Penny. He carried her every day, in a straitjacket, brushing her hair. The rule against killing the living was gone. The love that made him a person was not. When the governor beheads Hershel in Season 4's Too Far Gone, the most iconic act of violence in the show's run, he does something that reveals the full dimensions of what the broken rule costs. Hershel was the person who believed longest and most stubbornly that the rule could hold. He fought for the walkers in his barn because he believed they might be sick rather than dead, because the rule we don't kill the living has a corollary that he held to even more tightly. We don't give up on the living. He advocated mercy toward prisoners. He argued for negotiation when everyone around him wanted to fight. He was the moral voice of the group in the purest and most consistent way. And the governor cut his head off. Because Hershel's existence, his continued stubborn, infuriating, luminous existence, was the most direct possible rebuke to everything the governor had chosen to become. You cannot look at Hershel and still believe the rule was never real, so the governor removed him. Chapter 7. Negan. The ruler's performance. The breaking of it as theatre. Negan's relationship with the rule is the show's most complex and most deliberately constructed. Because Negan is the character who actually has rules, loudly stated, specifically enumerated, genuinely enforced, and whose entire character arc is built around the gap between the rules he enforces on others and the rules he holds himself to. The saviors operate on an elaborate code of conduct. You do not rape. You do not steal from fellow saviors. You do not act without authorization. You do not challenge Negan's authority. These rules are real in the sense that breaking them has genuine consequences. Negan personally executes people for violating them, which is both a statement of his seriousness and a demonstration of his power. He told a man named Rapey Davies' victims that he was going to be punished, and then he executed him in front of the community. The rules exist. They are enforced. The sanctuary is, in some narrow and terrible sense, a society with governance. But the rule that everything depends on, we don't kill the living. Negan does not hold himself to it for a moment. His empire is founded on killing. The lineup scene, which remains one of the most sustained and calculated acts of violence in the history of prestige television drama, is Negan performing a killing with the precision and self-awareness of a man who understands exactly what he is doing and exactly how it will land. He killed Abraham. He killed Glenn. He killed them in front of people who loved them, with a weapon he named after the woman he loved most, and he did it while maintaining a performance of casual good humour that was more disturbing than rage would have been. Because rage suggests being out of control, Negan was entirely in control. The irony that the show develops carefully is that Negan actually believes his rule-breaking saves more lives than it costs. His argument, articulated with characteristic directness in several conversations with Rick and others, is that the Saviours provide stability, resources and protection to multiple communities. People are alive because of the system Negan built. The tribute is the price of the protection. The killings are not cruelty but enforcement, the minimum necessary force to keep the system functioning. He is doing, he believes, a version of what Rick tried to do. Maintaining order, protecting people, making the math work. The difference, and it is not a subtle one, is that Rick's authority was granted by the people he led. Negan's was taken at the end of a bat. And that difference between power given and power seized is exactly what the rule we don't kill the living was designed to protect against. Because you cannot seize power with consent. You can only seize it by demonstrating your willingness to kill someone who doesn't consent. The bat is the foundation. Lucille is the argument. Every community that submits to the Saviours does so with Glenn's death visible in their memory. And that is not accident, but design. When Rick slashes Negan's throat in the Season 8 finale, and then immediately saves his life, what Rick is trying to do, impossibly, exhaustingly, in a way that almost no one around him can accept, is refuse to let the circle close. He will not become the thing he has been fighting by finishing it the way the thing would finish it. He will not kill. He will save. He will hold the rule one more time, here, at the very last possible moment, when holding it cost him more than it has ever cost anyone. Carl believed it was possible. Rick is going to find out. Chapter 8. Hershel Green, the one who held it longest and what it cost him. Before we talk about the characters who broke the rule in dramatic and consequential ways, it is important to spend time with the character who held it the longest. Because in a story about breaking, the person who resists the longest is as important as the ones who fall first. Hershel Green held the rule longer than anyone. He held it in his barn, where he kept walkers chained rather than killed because he believed, stubbornly, against all available evidence, that they might still be the people they used to be. He held it when Shane opened that barn and gunned down the walkers, while Hershel watched and the woman he had been keeping, a neighbour, and then Sophia fell out of the darkness. He held it through the loss of Otis and his faith, and his leg and two of his daughters. He held it through the flu outbreak at the prison, treating the dying without any guarantee of his own survival. He held it all the way to a field in Season 4, where he knelt in the dirt with a blade to his throat and heard Rick make a speech about coexistence. And he smiled. He genuinely smiled. Because even then he believed it. The governor killed him for that belief, which is the most honest statement the show makes about the cost of holding the rule. It will not always protect you. It will not guarantee your survival. The people around you who have broken it will be, in certain tactical situations, more dangerous than you are. Holding the line is not a survival strategy. It is a moral position, and moral positions in this universe are expensive. What Hershel's arc contributes to this analysis is the understanding that the rule is not just about behaviour, it is about the kind of world you are fighting for. Hershel held the rule not because he believed it would keep him alive, but because he believed that a world in which the rule was kept was the world worth surviving for. He was a doctor. He treated people. He believed in the possibility of healing. His entire character was a living argument that the thing you are protecting matters as much as the protection itself, that the means and the end cannot be cleanly separated, that becoming a monster to defeat monsters is not victory. The show agrees with him, ultimately. Not in the short term it kills him, but in the long arc of the narrative, in the world that eventually rebuilds in the series finale, in Ezekiel elected as governor, and Judith writing in her journal, and Daryl riding toward the horizon. The world that survives is the one Hershel believed in. It just took a very long time and very many deaths to get there. Chapter 9. Carol Pelletier, the rule she broke in silence and alone. Carol Pelletier's breaking of the rule is the show's quietest and in many ways its most devastating, because it happens almost entirely in private. She does not have the confrontation in a moonlit field that Rick has with Shane. She does not have the public performance that Shane constructs over Otis's grave. She does not have the theatrical display of power that marks every one of Negan's killings. She breaks the rule in a corridor, and in a grove, and in a dozen other places, and she tells almost no one, and she carries it entirely alone. Her first killing of the living is the murder of Karen and David at the prison in Season 4, when flu is spreading through the cell blocks and Carol makes the unilateral decision that the two infected people represent too great a risk to the group to be allowed to continue living. She drugs them, drags them out, kills them, and burns their bodies. She does not consult Rick, who is ostensibly in charge. She does not ask Hershel, who is treating the sick. She decides, implements, and says nothing until Rick confronts her. And even then she does not apologise. She tells him simply that it had to be done, and that she did it. This is the template for Carol's relationship with the rule from that point forward. She does not agonise publicly. She does not perform guilt. She does not make speeches about necessity. She makes a decision. She acts on it, and she absorbs the weight privately in the dark hours when she cannot sleep. And the show is careful not to tell you whether she is right. Hershel would have said she was wrong. Shane would have said she was obviously right. Rick banishes her, which is itself a complicated act of moral distancing. Rick has done things at least as dark as Carol's killing of Karen and David, but he cannot look at what Carol has done without needing to put space between them. The Grove scene is different in kind. Killing Lizzie is not a utilitarian calculation, not the removal of a threat for the protection of the group. It is an act of mercy in the truest and most terrible sense. Mercy for a child who cannot understand what she has done, who cannot be fixed, who will kill again. Carol holds Lizzie's hand and says, "Look at the flowers." And then she shoots the child, and then she sits in the field and weeps. It is one of the only times in the series we see Carol fully exposed. The performance of strength and practicality entirely gone. Just the grief and the weight and the impossibility of what she has just had to do. The flowers line has become iconic, and its iconicity is worth examining. It is iconic because it contains everything the show has to say about Carol in 3 words. Look at something beautiful. Look at something peaceful. Don't look at me. Don't make this harder. Just go somewhere quiet in your mind and let me do what has to be done. Carol has been doing this her entire adult life, creating small mercies, small beautiful things to place between herself and the reality of what she is doing. The cookies at Alexandria, the cardigan and the vacant smile, the flowers in the grove. She is simultaneously the most capable and the most alone person in the entire series, and both of those things come from the same source. Her later killings, The one-woman assault on Terminus, the strategic targeting of threats throughout the Whisperer War, the orchestration of Alpha's death, are all conducted with the same quiet efficiency. She does not stop breaking the rule once she starts. She refines her approach to it. She gets better at carrying the weight. She sleeps less. She grows a garden. She keeps going. Chapter 10. Michonne. The rule she broke before we knew her. Michonne arrives in The Walking Dead, already on the far side of the line. We meet her in Season 2's finale, as a cloaked figure with a katana and two armless, jawless walkers on chains, emerging from the mist to rescue Andrea. She's already fully formed as a survivor, capable, self-sufficient, apparently without the emotional weight that burdens every other character at this stage of the story. She seems, in those early appearances, to have already resolved whatever crisis the rule creates in everyone else. It takes several seasons for the show to reveal who Michonne was before, and what she did that made her into the person we meet. Her backstory, delivered in fragments across multiple seasons and filled in more completely in The Ones Who Live, involves the early days of the outbreak, a man named Mike who was her partner, their friend Terry, and the catastrophic failure of their community in Atlanta. Mike and Terry became addicted to drugs in the chaos of the early months, withdrawing from the work of survival, becoming liabilities. Michonne made a decision. She didn't kill them. Not directly, not with her own hands, not in the way Shane killed Otis or Carol killed Karen. But she left them. She chose not to protect them. And when they turned, she chained their reanimated bodies and used them as camouflage, converting the people she'd loved into tools for her own survival. This is a different category of breaking the rule, and the show knows it. Michonne did not pull a trigger, but she withdrew the protection that was keeping two living people alive, and she made that withdrawal consciously, and she's been living in the aftermath ever since. Her coldness in the early seasons is not character, it is armour. It is the specific hardness of a person who knows exactly what they are capable of, and has decided that caring too much is what made them capable of it. Her arc across the series is the slow, reluctant return to caring. Rick draws her back, Carl draws her back, Judith and RJ draw her back. By the time she leaves for the events of The Ones Who Live, she is the most fully rehumanized character in the story. Someone who broke the rule, carried the breaking of it in silence for years, and found her way back to something that allowed her to be in the world again without the armour. The show treats this as its most complete recovery, and it earns that treatment because of the specificity of what it put her through to get there. Chapter 11. Maggie Green. The Rule, Grief, and the Question of What Justice Requires. Maggie Green does not break the rule for the first time until relatively late in the series, and this is deliberate. She's held on the right side of the line for longer than almost anyone except Hershel, and the reason for this is also the reason her eventual crossing of it is so devastating. She is, for a long time, the embodiment of what the rule is actually for. The farm girl, the farmer's daughter, the woman who married Glenn Rhee, and kept her faith and kept her love and kept something in her that remained recognisably the person she had always been, even as the world removed everything else. Maggie Green is the show's argument that the rule is not just a survival strategy, but a form of grace. That holding the line is not weakness, but the most demanding kind of strength. That you can survive the apocalypse and remain, in some essential sense, yourself. Then Glenn died, and the argument got a great deal harder to make. In the immediate aftermath of Glenn's death, Maggie does not break the rule dramatically. She is in shock. She is pregnant. She is trying to survive the grief and the pregnancy, and the war with the Saviours simultaneously. But across Season 8, as she rises to lead the hilltop, you can see the shift happening. The slow hardening, the narrowing of mercy. the decisions that earlier Maggie would have made differently. She advocates for the execution of surrendered saviours when Rick wants to offer them terms. She moves through the post-war world with a focused anger that has no clean outlet and therefore gets applied sometimes to decisions that would benefit from more consideration. By the time of Dead City, Maggie has broken the rule more times than she could easily count, and the weight of it is worn differently by her than by almost any other character in the story. She carries it not as guilt, but as debt. A thing she owes, not to the people she has killed, but to Glenn. As if every necessary killing is a betrayal of the man who believed you could get through this without becoming what she has become. The most haunting aspect of her arc in the spin-off is the scene where she watches Negan perform his eeny meeny mini mo routine with a new electrified bat, the exact shape of Glenn's murder, repeated in front of her. And she does not stop him because stopping him would cost her something she needs. She stands there. She watches. And the look on Lauren Cohan's face in that moment is not horror. It is recognition. Chapter 12. Daryl, Eugene, and the ones who tried to hold on. Daryl Dixon is a complex case in this analysis because his first killing of the living is, in some ways, the most defensible in the series. Straightforward self-defense, no ambiguity, no premeditation. And yet the show treats it with no less weight than any other first killing, because the weight is not about justification. The weight is about what happens to you afterward. Daryl grew up in conditions that prepared him, in a terrible way, for the world the apocalypse made. His father was abusive and absent in turns. His brother Merle was dangerous and unpredictable, and the dominant force in Daryl's early life, teaching him to hunt and to survive, and to be deeply suspicious of other people's intentions. By the time the apocalypse begins, Daryl already knows more about violence than almost anyone in Rick's group. He has lived in proximity to it his whole life. The rule we don't kill the living is one he has probably held to not from moral conviction, but from the practical understanding that killing draws retaliation, and retaliation is inconvenient. What the show does with Daryl is trace his journey from this pragmatic, self-protective neutrality towards something more like genuine moral commitment. He starts as someone who holds the rule because it's easier. He moves towards someone who holds it because he has decided it means something. And when he breaks it, as he does repeatedly across the seasons, the breaks are legible as departures from an actual standard, rather than simply as the erosion of a useful policy. Part of what makes Daryl's arc so resonant across the full run of the show is that he is almost never the character who initiates the moral debate. He is not a speech maker. He does not gather the group and articulate a philosophy. He acts, and the gap between how he acts and what he feels is where most of his characterization lives. In the look on his face after a decision, rather than the words he uses to explain it. When he punches Negan during the lineup and Glenn dies as a direct result of it, Daryl does not get to process that grief in public. He carries it privately and absolutely, adding it to the already considerable weight he was already carrying, and the show does not let him put it down. It just watches him carry it, through the sanctuary, through the hilltop, through years of wars and losses, through France where he is still moving forward, still carrying, still trying to figure out what the rule means, in a landscape that has no memory of who he was before. His arc in Daryl Dixon, the spin-off set in France, extends this question into entirely new territory. Away from the group, away from the context that built him, Daryl is forced to figure out what the rule means to him in isolation, without Rick's example or Carol's companionship, or the pressure of the larger community's moral ecosystem. The answer the show develops is complicated and still unfolding, but the fact that he is still asking the question, still measuring his actions against something, still carrying the weight, is itself the show's most persistent statement of hope. Eugene Porter's relationship with the rule deserves a separate examination because his breaking of it is unlike anyone else's. Eugene does not kill the living with a weapon. Eugene kills the living with a lie. His claim in Season 4 that he is a scientist with a cure, a human genome project researcher who knows how to stop the outbreak, directly causes the deaths of multiple people who die protecting him on the road to Washington. Abraham turns his life upside down and loses people he loves because of what Eugene told him. Eugene is sitting in a van somewhere watching it happen, knowing it is a lie, saying nothing. When he finally confesses, in Season 5's Self-Help, on the side of a road in Georgia, to a man who then beats him unconscious, the moment is handled with an honesty that is almost painful. He is not a survivor in any conventional sense. He is a coward who survived by convincing capable people to protect him through deception. The deaths that resulted from his lie are not direct kills, but they are not nothing either, and the show makes him carry them, through his eventual acts of genuine courage in the war with the Saviours, through his Commonwealth arc, through his decision to turn himself in to protect Max Mercer, even knowing it means a death sentence. Eugene Porter's arc is the story of a man who broke the rule by accident and spent years trying to build something that would justify having survived it. Chapter 13. The Inheritance. What the broken rule leaves behind. We've spent this video moving through the characters, chapter by chapter, looking at the specific ways each of them crossed the line, and the picture that emerges from that process is not the one you might expect. It is not a picture of corruption or of irredeemable darkness. It is something more nuanced and, in the end, more hopeful than that. Although the hope is the expensive, earned kind that comes after a long time in the dark. What the breaking of the rule leaves behind in almost every case is not a person who has lost their humanity. It is a person who has learned something painful and permanent about the cost of being human in a world that makes the rule impossible to keep. They have paid for that knowledge. They carry it. And carrying it, the specific weight of having done the thing you said you would never do, is what makes them different from the governor, and from Alpha, and from Pamela Milton, all of whom broke the rule without the weight, without the aftermath, without the specific gravity of someone who knew what they were losing when they crossed the line. The show's central argument, the one it has been making across 11 seasons and is still making in the spin-offs, is not that people are good or that people are bad or that the apocalypse reveals some hidden truth about human nature that was always there. The argument is that people are in process. They are making decisions in real time under impossible conditions, and those decisions accumulate. And the accumulation is not a verdict. It is a record, and records can be added to. The person you became yesterday is not necessarily the person you will be tomorrow, if someone pulls you back from the edge and you choose to reach for the hand. Rick's mercy at the end of Season 8 is the clearest statement of this argument. He has broken the rule more times, and in more ways than almost anyone. He has bitten a man's throat out with his teeth. He has planned and executed preemptive killings. He has made decisions that, catalogued plainly, look indistinguishable from the decisions of the people he was fighting against. And then, in the one moment where finishing it would have been both easier and more satisfying than stopping it, he stops. He chooses the rule one more time. In the ruins of the rule, with everything he's done behind him, he picks it back up and holds it. Carl made him do it. This is the show's most persistent argument about the relationship between generations in this universe, that the children, the ones who are born into or who grow up in the apocalypse, and who never knew the old world's rules but have heard about them, who carry those rules as something inherited rather than lived, are the ones who hold the rule most purely. Carl's letter, Judith's certainty. The children of the Commonwealth going to school in the morning, they are the argument that the rule was worth something, that the people who held it, imperfectly and expensively and only sometimes, were doing something real. Hershel Green said it from a prison yard, when the world was still relatively early in its ending, and he was still in possession of both his legs and most of his illusions. You step outside, you risk your life. You take a drink of water, you risk your life. And nowadays you breathe and you risk your life. Every moment now you don't have a choice. The only thing you can choose is what you're risking it for. This is the most honest statement about the rule that the show ever produces. You can't guarantee you will keep it. You cannot promise in a world this brutal and this arbitrary that the moment will not come when keeping it is genuinely impossible. But you can choose what you're risking it for. You can choose to risk it for something worth the cost. Rick risked it for the idea that civilization was worth rebuilding. Hershel risked it for the idea that mercy was still possible. Carol risked it for the people she could not stop loving, even when love was the most expensive thing she owned. Maggie risked it for Glenn's memory, which is the most complicated and the most human reason of all, trying to be worthy of the person who believed you could be good. Daryl is still risking it somewhere in France, still asking the question, still measuring the answer against a standard he picked up from the people who shaped him. None of them kept the rule perfectly. Not one, in 11 seasons, across all these stories. The rule we don't kill the living was broken by everyone who ever held it, in conditions that made holding it impossible, for reasons that were usually at least partially understandable. The show is honest about this. It does not offer a character who managed to get through to the end clean. There is no one it can point to and say, this person held the line and that is why everything is okay now. And this honesty is, in the end, the bravest thing the show does. A lesser story would have preserved someone, would have maintained one character in a state of moral purity, a living symbol of what was possible, a proof of concept that the rule could be kept. The Walking Dead refuses to do this. It insists, stubbornly and consistently, that no one gets through the apocalypse clean. Not the doctor, not the preacher, not the woman who tried hardest and the man who started with the most conviction. Everyone crosses the line. The line is there to be crossed by everyone, eventually. But the crossing is not the end. That is the other thing the show insists on, just as stubbornly. The crossing is an event, not a verdict. You are not finished because you broke the rule. You are changed in ways that cannot be undone, changed in ways you will carry for the rest of your life. But you are not finished. The question that remains after the crossing is, what now? What do you do with the version of yourself that exists on this side of the line? Do you let the breaking of the rule define everything you do afterward, in the way it defined the governor's every act? Or do you keep measuring yourself against the rule, keep letting it weigh on you, keep trying, imperfectly, expensively, sometimes failing, to get back to something like what it represented? Rick Grimes spends 9 seasons on the second path. Carol Pelletier has been on it for longer. Daryl Dixon is somewhere in France on it right now. What it offers instead is the last image of Judith Grimes sitting in the light, writing down what happened, recording it, refusing to let it be lost or simplified or reduced to a lesson that fits neatly on a page. The story is complicated. The people were complicated. The rule was broken and broken and broken again. And the world that survived the breaking is not the world the rule was made for, but it is a world. It is still going. People are still choosing every morning what to risk it for. That is The Walking Dead's answer to its own question. The rule couldn't hold. But the trying, the genuine, costly, imperfect, generation after generation trying, was not nothing. It was the thing that made the difference between the world that survived and the world that didn't. Between Judith writing in the light and the governor's fish tanks. Between Daryl, still riding, still asking, still carrying the weight, and the walkers, who carry nothing at all. The Walking Dead are the ones who still feel the weight of what they carry. That is what separates them. That is what always separated them. Not the rule itself, but the willingness to feel the cost of breaking it, to let it matter, to keep going anyway. Thanks for spending this time in the world with us. If this video found you somewhere quiet and helped you drift towards sleep, that is exactly what it was made for. There is more lore where this came from, more slow, careful dives into the stories that keep us thinking long after the credits roll. Rest well. We'll be here when you come back.